our virtual Specialist Importers Trade Tasting event, known as SITT, with an exclusive interview with Jancis Robinson. Jancis has long been a champion of the independent wine sector, and so it's really fantastic to be able to catch up with her to find out the opportunities and challenges that she sees for indies for the months ahead. So welcome, Jancis. Really lovely to talk to you. And I know that you've always done a lot of work which works with independent retailers, but particularly over this period of time, I know that in March last year, we'd sort of barely got to grips with the lockdown at all. And yet you were really busy from early on collating a list of wine retailers who could deliver to consumers who were self-isolating, and just sort of making a list of what the retailers were doing. Could you tell us a little bit about that time and why you felt compelled to do that?
And I shouldn't take credit for it, actually. It was our brilliant Italian specialist on jancisrobinson.com, Walter Speller, who actually used to work in the Pont La Tour wine shop. So he was an independent retailer. And he, although he lives in Italy now, and he, as soon as lockdown happened, he said, you know, I think for the sake of all your members and your visitors, and very importantly for the independent retailers too, we ought, brackets, you ought to compile a list of all the independent retailers who will deliver to the locked down. And of course, our site is global in its reach. So we, I think we must have, you know, I can't even remember how we started it, but we put out a call for independent retailers to contact us and tell us what they were offering. And God, I realized I'd made a real rod for my own back, because of course there was a desperate need for communication, and we were swamped by people contacting us. And I haven't counted the list recently, but it certainly got up to 900.
Wow.
Not by no means all in Britain, but of course a very high proportion were from Britain. And so we had to decide how we were going to show it regionally. We kind of carved the country up, carved England up, and then had Scotland and Wales and Northern Ireland, and indeed Ireland separately. And it was lovely. It was actually very heartwarming. Some of these independents would come back with stories about, you know, delivering to people, and people say, "Oh, thank you," you know, and so many of them had different things to offer. So we couldn't obviously publish a kind of story for each one, so it was pretty succinct. But we tried to get across, you know, where was free delivery and anything special that they were offering. Some of them were doing online tastings pretty early on. So they were a very enterprising lot. And I think, well, it was lovely to have a focus. It just worked well for both sides, for the consumer and for the retailer. And it, you know, a lot of the time people say about websites that community is quite important, and it certainly helped boost the community feel. Everybody was in the same boat and looking to delicious wine to help them through it.
Yeah, because it seems like a long time ago now, March last year, and trying to sort of remember exactly how it went about. But obviously nobody had been in a situation of anything like it before, and at first I think
desperately sort of building websites or finding out how to go into e-commerce, quite understandably. And it also had a nice side effect for us, although it was not something we thought about originally, because we've always had we've got quite an extensive free bit of jancisrobinson.com, and one of them is where to buy, you know, a list of, and it helped. We suddenly realized come kind of July that we had all these retailers, and so we jolly well needed to collate what's in our where to buy with this list. And so I think it helped us update the where to buy section quite considerably.
Yeah, that's good. And obviously, as you said, they needed there was a need for communication, but they needed a platform really as well to just be able to let people know that what they were doing.
Especially when, you know, if shops looked closed,
yeah,
you know, no one could tell they were actually operating online just by walking past, for instance.
I think initially it was unclear as to whether wine shops could open or would be allowed to open, and so some of them closed and then reopened, and all kinds of things happened, I think. So
Messaging, yes.
so it was useful to be able to share that and have that platform, as we say. And do you think independent wine retailers have done a good job through the pandemic? It's been a lot of changes as we've gone through the nearly a year now.
Tough for them. I mean, I suppose what one has to say is that it hasn't been as tough for them as for the hospitality business, which you know, is still suffering terribly. But of course, it has been really, really tough. I hope and think that there's probably been a little groundswell of sympathy for the independents, because it did seem really unfair that people could walk into a supermarket and buy their wine when there were restrictions placed on the independent retailers. And I suppose too, you know, all that feeling about the high street, trying to preserve, again, community, trying to preserve independent businesses. So I don't have the figures to back up this assertion, but certainly I think the fact that so many independents have had to go online, that has given them actually a direct contact with their customers, hasn't it? In a way that if someone walks in and buys a bottle and then walks out, you haven't a clue who they were. So at least the retailers now actually have email addresses and often physical addresses. So it probably has brought customers and retailers closer together in an utterly unintended way.
Yes, I think so. And I think from some of the independent retailers that I've spoken to over the past few months, that and they've said that they're amazed and pleased that people have been willing to queue outside. Sometimes a few people in the queue, and not always in the best weather, but they have chosen specifically to return because they want to go back to that shop and support local, and probably move to other local retailers in the same high street and do their shopping that way.
Yeah. No, there's a very strong feeling, particularly I suspect in medium and smaller towns, to desperately keep that high street alive. I don't honestly know what's going to happen in Oxford Street, but you know, I think people are more aware again of community and the importance of that than they ever were, or realized that they were.
And I think also some of the retailers I've spoken to, they definitely picked up new customers.
Oh, that's good.
And they were able to show that they can show their level of customer service that you wouldn't get in other places, perhaps, and that's helped a little bit. But how would you do you have any other ideas of how independents can retain those customers? Obviously, the months ahead, we don't really know what's going to happen, but at some point there will be some sort of normality, but they want to try and retain the new customers that they secure.
Yeah. Well, as I say, they now have so much information.
Yes.
They know what individual people want. And so rather than, you know, having to buttonhole them on the pavement outside, and they can, you know, when they see, oh, I saw you bought this Chianti from me, you know, a month ago, just got this new one in, which I think you really might like. And, you know, that's a sort of individual attention that people, I hope, will respond to, and the sort of thing that any thoughtful retailer should be working on, really, you know, rather than just hoping that people will pop in. But I mean, there are very few, it seems to me, very few independent retailers where the shop staff are occupied every single minute that the place is open. So there's lots of time for staff to work on this, isn't there? And be sending out emails and so on.
Yeah, definitely. And in terms of countries, varietals?
Also, sorry, I just
Yeah.
would like to add the self-evident truth, particularly since your aim, this is all about specialist importers, that, you know, the specialist importer and the specialist retailer are just offering so much more interesting wine than the average supermarket, we have to say.
Yes.
I mean, on jancisrobinson.com, we, you know, pretty much every wine we recommend is retail, it's independents that stock them. Andy Howard does a great job, fellow master of wine, at supermarket reports and looking at them. But the main focus of our work is highlighting the really interesting wines that may be available in quantities far too small for a supermarket to bother with. And the offer just gets better all the time, doesn't it? So long as you can fight your way through Brexit, a post-Brexit bureaucracy, rather. Yeah.
But you've continued to update your website and put out newsletters in the same pace that you were doing before, probably more content there, and so you've still found plenty of things to write about. Do you think that there's just still a lot there for?
Massive. I mean, we are mad. We publish 2 new articles a day, proper articles, which
wow,
we're just in the habit of, and we should, you know, we don't have to, we just do. And no, there's never any shortage whatsoever. And with my weekly articles for the Financial Times, I never run out of subjects, because the world of wine just keeps evolving, doesn't it? Even in this strange time when we've got so many trade barriers, you know, we've you know, China sort of saying no to Australia, and the US with these massive tariffs on EU imports, and now are kind of getting used to life after Brexit. That it's not easy for wine to whiz around the world, but the wine itself. I mean, I must say that in all this lockdown, I've felt very envious in some ways of wine vine growers. Because, you know, when we're all locked in our city houses or whatever, it must have been so lovely to go out into a vineyard and just watch the annual miracle of a vine who couldn't care less about it.
Just forget about what else is going on.
Yeah.
Yeah, and they're always in such beautiful places as well.
Yeah.
Yes, no, I agree with you there. And in terms of I know that you have been writing about so many different places, but in terms of countries, varietals or styles or both, which wines would you suggest might be the next trend for indies to get behind?
Well, some of them are already behind the 2 countries I often say when I'm talking to the general public about, you know, which are up and coming. Portugal and Greece would be my obvious answers. For slightly similar reasons, because both have such a wonderful array of indigenous grape varieties and unique style. But I'm also getting more and more interested in Eastern Europe. I think, you know, we're seeing the fruits of what has been considerable investment in cellars and vineyards there. And obviously that is hugely varied. You know, you go from the Czech Republic, which has got some really interesting stuff, you know, right through to Armenia and Georgia, and again, such variety, and some really good value too.
And is it the indigenous grapes from those countries that you think are the ones worth discovering, or have they been doing a bit of both with?
Well, they've all got indigenous varieties, I think, as far as I can, you know, quick checklist. Maybe Russia is a little bit short of indigenous varieties, and most of the varieties that they used to claim are actually Georgian, as I discovered. But most of those countries have actually, yeah.
And so I think with countries like Portugal and Greece, sometimes consumers are put off by the quite hard to pronounce grape varieties and labels that they have. But do you see that as an opportunity for independents to try and explain what the flavors are like? And
absolutely, yes. And I always say that an independent wine store is very like a bookstore, that you go, and this is talking to consumers here. People often say to me, how do I learn more about wine? And I know that I ought to say, buy my books, or, you know, visit jancisrobinson.com or something. But actually, what I always say is strike up a relationship with a local wine store. Go in, tell them what you have liked in the past, and it's in their interests to recommend something more interesting or better value or similar, but a little bit different. And you know, the way you would go into a bookshop and say, I love that author, what
Yeah.
can you recommend? And it's in the interests of both parties, for, again, for the retailer to give them a good recommendation and pass on some knowledge. And most of the time, people who work in wine stores have so much knowledge that they want to share. And it's no longer the case that they're sort of snooty and talking down to people. And of course, the great joy of wandering around a store or choosing something online is that you don't have to pronounce the name. Actually, you can pull the bottle off the shelf or just click on it online. So it's not like the old days where you know, you walked into Berry Brothers and there wasn't a bottle to be seen, and you had to actually pronounce the name before you you could order it.
Yeah, excellent. Okay, thank you for that. And then the other thing I wanted to ask you about is that I know in recent years you launched your own glassware, and I'm quite interested to hear more about that. So I just wondered if you could talk through the glassware and why it might be of interest to the independent sector.
Absolutely. I should have one, actually. As it happens, I've got, there's a stemless version, which I use for water. I'm not a great fan of stemless wine glasses. But the main thing, what happened was, a young designer who'd had great success with bone china and whiskey glasses and cocktail glasses, called Richard Brendan, approached me and said, I want to do wine glasses, but I know I need expert help, and everyone says I should come and see you. And I sent him away saying, I don't do hardware, you know, I'm words. And anyway, he was very persistent, very nice, and obviously very talented, had a nice team. And so and then I thought, hang on, I've got 40 years experience of tasting wine, and I've got a very strong idea about the ideal wine glass. So I first of all had to say to him, I don't believe in having lots of wine glasses. So are you prepared to just have one wine glass? Took that on the chin. Because I've never understood why white wine is served in smaller glasses than red. It needs just as much room, and, you know, we want to drink just as much of it. So that was the first. And also, who's got masses of space for a different glass for, you know, every single wine? It's all part of decluttering. So my perfect wine glass had to be as thin as a Zalto, because once you've experienced that lovely thin rim, you know, it's very difficult to go. Therefore has to be handmade, not machine made. But I wanted it to be a more classical shape, a more classical bowl than the sort of zigzag of the Zalto. And we played around with lots of designs and found one where it really does. It's really efficacious. It really channels the. It's very flattering, very. It's easy to taste wine the wine's very expressive in it, put it that way. The other thing, though, was that it absolutely had to be dishwasher proof, because I don't think hand washing glasses is fun. So they're handmade in Slovenia, they're dishwasher proof. There's just one. And I'm not saying that, you know, they're obviously not cheap because of the hand being so fine, but they are very hardy. Although they seem thin, they're very, very hardy. And I think they'd be great for tasting generally. And I don't know that all that many people in the British wine trade know that Sensible Wine Services hire out my handmade glasses when I last looked for the same price as the Riedel machine made ones. And they're a little bit bigger, and I think will make their wines seem even better when they're showing them off. So that's very important. And Liberty Wine are in charge of distributing them to the trade if people want to get a trade price. So.
Did you did you have to try a few prototypes first? Did you?
Yeah. And then I tried out, it's ridiculous, the team on jancisrobinson.com, we're now 16 editorially. And the only time we ever get together, because we all work at home, is Christmas dinner. And so it was Christmas dinner about 2 or 3 years ago when I tried out the prototype on everybody, and it seemed to go down well. So it's good, and I've had really good feedback. They're doing really well in Japan, New Zealand, America. We just need to crack France, because the French, they put up with the most rubbish glasses. It's really odd.
Yeah, I suppose different countries get used to.
The Italians are good. The Italians have always put a lot of effort into their wine glass, but yeah.
And the water glass that you're just showing me now, is that something that you also launched at the same time?
Yes, there's a water glass, a wine glass, and it's quite funny when I say to Richard Brendan, so actually I want one glass and 2 decanters, okay? Because I think decanters, the job that a decanter does, there are 2 very different jobs. It's either young wine and you want to aerate it, in which case, so stupid, aren't I? I ought to have these with me. richardbrendan.com is where you can see details, or there's a panel on jancisrobinson.com that you can as well. And that for young wine, you want to expose it to as much air as possible. So there's a very beautiful, big, wide decanter with a wide neck and no stopper. And it's sort of perfect for swooshing around if you want to sort of really aerate it. And then, of course, if it's an old wine, you want to pour it off the sediment, but you don't want it to be exposed to oxygen. So that's a sort of tall, narrow one that echoes the shape of the glass, only upside down. With a rather nice stopper.
Excellent. Well, that's fantastic. So thank you for telling me all about that, and just for taking the time to talk to us today. And
no, lovely. I should go back to the website now. I hope it all goes very well anyway.
I hope you get
and very, very best of luck to the independent retailers and the specialist importers, because we need you.
Fantastic. Thank you, Jancis. And I hope that we'll be able to meet again in the future at an event that's not virtual.
Exactly.
Fabulous. Thank you.